Yeah, Amazing Grazing is, of course, it's an extension program at North Carolina State University. And we kind of define it as the pasture-based livestock program. And that can be a lot of different things. It, of course, centers around grazing. And we spend a lot of time talking with producers, farmers, and ranchers about pasture ecology. And if you remember, ecology is that branch of biology, the study of life. Ecology is how living things interact with each other. So we try to get folks to think about it's not just about the cows or the sheep or the goats or the horses, whatever you're grazing.
Welcome to the Beef Podcast. I'm your host, Brandy Buzzard, and it's my pleasure to bring you the latest trends and issues from the best and brightest minds in the beef industry. Today, we are joined by a very special guest, my friend Johnny Rogers. Johnny and his wife Sharon own Rogers Cattle Company in Roxborough, North Carolina. Rogers Cattle Company markets purebred red Angus bulls and females across the country. They also offer hair sheep as well as pasture-raised beef, pork, and lamb from the farm and at farmers markets. Really excited to have this conversation, so let's get started. Thanks for being here, Johnny. It's really good to see you again.
Yeah, thanks, Brandy. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so I know a lot about, well, not everything, but a lot about your work prior to this. But for our audience who doesn't and hasn't heard and has yet to hear from you, if you could just bring us up to speed on your background, how you got started in beef and livestock industry, and kind of your career thus far to get us all off on the same foot.
Yeah, that sounds good. I grew up in East Tennessee on a small beef cattle operation. The University of Tennessee, got a BS in animal science, and was very active there with the livestock and beef judging teams, and wanted to pursue an advanced degree. So I ended up at North Carolina State University working on the master's degree in nutrition that I got there. And I always thought it was interesting. I was going to leave Tennessee and go to a cattle school and a cattle state. So I was going to go west, right? And it just didn't work out for me to go west to graduate school. So I actually went east to a state that had fewer beef cattle numbers than the one I grew up in. When you think you've got it all figured out, life can kind of throw you a curveball. And it never really occurred to me why I went to North Carolina until I met my wife Sharon there. And then I thought, okay, now I know why I needed to be in North Carolina. It became really clear there. So anyway, Sharon was finishing up her bachelor's in animal science there, and her faculty advisor was my chair of my master's program, so Dr. Ray Harvey at the time. So we didn't necessarily meet that way, but she was actually on the livestock judging team with NC State, and I coached the judging team while I was in graduate school at State, not while she was on the team, but I was traveling with them some. So we got to know each other that way. And anyway, it took, I guess, if to leave it at that. So I finished up at NC State. And my goal the whole time was to be a college professor. So I was going to get a PhD from the get-go until I finished my master's program. And then I decided that, hey, I've been in school a long time. I'd like to do something else. So I went to work with Purina Mills. They needed a beef cattle specialist in the mid-Atlantic area. And, man, that gave me a great opportunity to travel and meet a lot of people, learn a lot about all aspects of the beef industry. I mean, I knew the cow-calf seed stock thing pretty good. Stocker industry, I didn't know a whole lot about. Learned a lot about that because they were, customers of ours, and got introduced to the feedlot industry through some trips and working with folks out west. So that was really kind of builds on itself. You have a formal education, and then the education really starts when you get out of school. So along about 2001, Purina decided they didn't need a beef cattle specialist in the mid-Atlantic area any longer. So it was one of those times that we could move and, continue, pursuing that career at another location. But Sharon and I really didn't want to move. So we said, well, what do you really want to do? And well, let's lease some land and go into the cattle business. So we found some land for lease about an hour and a half north of where we lived at the time in Roxboro, North Carolina. And again, one of those things builds on itself. The department head of animal science at the time, we talked to him about what we wanted to do. And he said, "Do you know Tommy Wagstaff?" I said, "Yeah, up in Roxboro. I sell him feed, or I used to sell him feed when I was working with Purina." He said, "Well, talk to him about leasing some land up that way." And again, lo and behold, that's kind of the way it worked out, is again, one step in life builds onto the next one. At least it has for me. So we leased a farm, bought some cows. They were just commercial black cows, and we had already bought a few registered Red Angus cows, and we spent the rest of 20 years trying to turn all those black cows red. It takes a long time to turn a black cow red. Turn a red cow black pretty quick, So,
oh yeah.
But that's sort of what we did. Some custom grazing and did a lot of other things. Of course, we direct market some meat, still do today. Had some meat goats for a while. Got into the hair sheep business, still in the hair sheep business. And if you look at the enterprises we've had through the years, you can say, man, that guy right there is easily distracted by a lot of different things. And I am intrigued by a lot of, trying new things and kind of seeing what fits and what works. So we did some custom grazing. And again, it's one of those things. A lot of the folks I knew and had met through selling feed, they're the people that sent us heifers to develop, some cow, dry cows to graze, in the off season. So all those things kind of work together. And we found a way to kind of make a living doing that for about 15 years. And then about 10 years ago, Amazing Grazing, the program at NC State, they needed a coordinator. So they asked if I'd be interested. And that was along about the time a guy my age would get a midlife crisis. So I like to say, that, a lot of guys will get a sports car and a girlfriend, but I got a day job. And I'll say, Brandy, that's a much better financial move than the girlfriend and the convertible. So anyway, I worked for NC State and doing a lot of extension meetings. So I get a chance to work with farmers just like me, that are interested in grazing and help them kind of build better grazing systems. And so that kind of brings us up to now. We're, I should say we grew our registered cow numbers. And we mainly did that because we started cooperating with Red Hill Farms in Lafayette, Tennessee. They had a bull sale, spring and fall bull sale. So we hitched our wagon to them. They had a market established, and that really paved the way to us being able to sell more, registered cattle, both bulls and females. And that has been, by far one of the best decisions we've ever made. We gave up some independence, I guess, if you will. But I always like to say I don't think independence should be our goal. Interdependence should be our goal, and, working with other people and achieving your dreams and hopefully helping them achieve theirs as well. So that's been a key move that we made and had a lot of fun along the way. So I think that gets us up for the most part to now, I guess.
As you know, I live in Kansas, so agriculture and raising cattle in Kansas doesn't look exactly the same as it does in the Carolinas and Tennessee. But I was fortunate enough that I visited Red Hill Farms once when I don't even know what year it was, but it was a while back. It was when I only had one child, so it's been a bit. And just the diversity of agriculture and the topography there in that, I guess, mid-Atlantic region might be the right thing to call it. I just found that really fascinating. I love learning. I love learning about what other people do and driving through that area and seeing like the tobacco barns, but then also like the way that people are managing grass and feeding cows and, in an area where moisture is an issue sometimes from a too much standpoint and not necessarily from a not enough standpoint, which is where I'm at in life. And so I just find that region really interesting. And so, because it's different, it's very different than what I grew up with. And you live, right in the heart of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of diversity, and I guess, we're fortunate. We have a lot of small, part-time cattle operations that may, have even multiple, species on their farm. They may be in the poultry business, but they got a small cow herd. Or they may be, multi-million dollar, I'll call them family ag corporations, if you will, that have maybe 1,000 or more cows, sweet potatoes, tobacco, bell peppers, cucumbers. North Carolina is a very diverse agricultural state. I noticed that when I first moved over here. Lots of, like I say, lots of food crops, I'll call it. And of course, the standard corn and beans too. And not a tremendously large cattle state. In North Carolina, beef cattle production is not a big part of the North Carolina ag economy, but it's a very important part of the ag economy because what it does, it ties everything else together. You've got hog operations, somewhere where they've got to spray their hog effluent somewhere. Well, that grows grass, in North Carolina. So what's going to eat the grass? Cattle. You've got a labor force that you want to keep busy 12 months out of the year. Well, during the cropping season, it's easy to keep them busy. But what are you going to do in the shoulder seasons? Early spring, winter, and maybe into the fall some. So that's where beef cattle can kind of really fit. And so add diversity and some stability or a nice foundation to a lot of ag enterprises throughout the mid-Atlantic, mid-South, Southeast area. We don't have, a lot of our operations aren't necessarily big enough, don't have that scale like you might be able to achieve in your part of the world. So you kind of have to do what you can with. So, and that rain, you're right. The rain, we're finding out it can be a tremendous blessing, and it can be too much of a good thing. We had the challenges we had with the hurricanes this last fall have been tough, and folks in western North Carolina, we were fortunate we didn't have any damage where we were, but a lot of our friends out in the mountains and not just North Carolina, Tennessee, North Georgia, South Carolina, Virginia. A lot of those were hearts go out to them. So,
Lallemand Animal Nutrition, the makers of Levucel SC, are a global leader in the production of yeast and bacteria for animal nutrition. Levucel SC is the only naturally occurring rumen-specific active dry yeast probiotic designed to optimize rumen function, boost fiber digestion, and help get you more out of your native rangeland or pasture. No matter how you supplement your herd, including Levucel SC can help your cows grow bigger calves. Discover the right formulation for your herd at chooselevucelsc.com.
You mentioned, I want to circle back here, you mentioned Amazing Grazing and how you started taking over, you're the coordinator for that program, the leader of that program now. And I had not heard of that. I knew that you were very involved in grazing, but I didn't legitimately know the name of it. So you share with us what is Amazing Grazing and kind of what you do with that.
Yeah, Amazing Grazing is, of course, it's an extension program at North Carolina State University. And it's, we kind of define it as the pasture-based livestock program. And that can be a lot of different things. It, of course, centers around grazing. And we spend a lot of time talking with producers, farmers, and ranchers about pasture ecology. And if you remember, ecology is that branch of biology, the study of life. Ecology is how living things interact with each other. So we try to get folks to think about it's not just about the cows or the sheep or the goats or the horses, whatever you're grazing, but it's also about the forage. It's about the grass. It's about the plant itself. It's about the soil. It's about the soil microbes. It's about the birds and the bees and the butterflies and, all the wildlife that's out there. All those things kind of live out there. I mean, pastures, if you think about them, a well-managed pasture is home to a lot of critters, not just the ones that we're interested in, our livestock. So we try to get folks to think about that and, not just focus about production, but also look at the system itself, and remember that you're not on the outside of the system. You're in it. You're in that system on a daily basis, and, you're part of it, and So that's why I always like to say sometimes I know at home we will make decisions for the plant someday. Someday we'll make decisions based on enhancing the soil. Some days we'll, enhance the performance of the livestock is going to be our focus. And sometimes it's the human, that needs to be taken care of. Sometimes the human just needs to take a little time off to reflect and relax and, go wherever, and to get away from it for just a little bit. So we try to get folks to think about that. And we do a lot of workshops, a lot of hands-on workshops. So again, I get a chance to go out and work with farmers just like me. I get a chance to continue to learn. So that's kind of my role with Amazing Grazing. And it's been a lot of fun, because I had been farming long enough, on my own there to kind of learn some things. So it's fun to be able to share that. And it's kind of almost like walking down memory lane when you start, you see somebody and you think, yeah, I remember I went through that on year 3 at our place. and so you can kind of help them hopefully not make some of the mistakes you did. But anyway, it's a lot of fun, and it's funny how things work out. I always like to say it's almost unfair because I'm almost getting to do my first favorite job in the world would be to be a farmer or rancher. So I've kind of got to do that some. My second choice would have been being a college professor. So I kind of get to do some of the fun part of being a college professor without all the writing, securing grants and journal articles, the stuff I wouldn't have liked at all. I mean, I could have done it, I think, looking back on it, but no, I don't want to go back and doing that. I have tremendous respect for the folks that do.
That's a different kind of tedious work.
Yes.
We do tedious things. That's a different measurement of tedious.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I'm trying not to geek out and just talk about grass all the time. So bear with me here. But you were mentioning, I know that you guys have had sheep for a really long time and you're talking about soil health. And so we're going to get to all those things. But with Amazing Grazing, when I was kind of prepping for this, you were talking about adaptive grazing techniques and how that optimizing livestock performance while also improving soil health. And so that kind of goes to what you were saying, both about interdependence between people, but can be interdependent between different living beings, and also how you make decisions for the plant or for the soil or for the people at one time. So is there maybe an opportunity there to talk a bit more about some of those grazing techniques that optimize livestock or forage while improving the soil health? Yeah,
that could get really complex in a hurry, but that's
Sorry.
what we're here for, right? No, we call it adaptive grazing because we want folks to think about making observations and not getting so prescriptive in what they do or having a recipe like saying, okay, I'm going to move my animals once a day or once a week or 4 times a day. There's times when all those methods, are true, but what you need to think about are some of the principles of soil health that are out there. NRCS, has their big 4, I call them, that they kind of came up with, and some groups have added 2 more. But keeping the soil covered, that kind of makes sense, right? Nature does not like bare ground. She's going to make something grow there, whether you want or not. There's going to be a plant that grows there. And your job is to try to get it where it's something that your livestock will eat. So keep the soil covered as much as possible, protect it from the sun and the rain, and wind. In your part of the country, you can have some real wind erosion out there. Keep a living root, growing in the soil as much as possible. And that kind of goes back to that very special interdependent relationship that plants have with soil microbes. I always like to say they have this barter system going on, in the soil where, the plants actually leak carbon containing compounds. So, that whole thing starts, of course, with photosynthesis, carbon's entering the plant. And I always think it's fascinating, that you're literally growing something, plant material out of thin air, really, right? Carbon dioxide is kind of where that comes from. So making these long, complex chains of carbohydrates, and some of those are leaked out through the plant roots. And then that's food, for soil microbial life. And again, then of course, the plants are saying, okay, this is not a one-way street, Mr. and Miss Soil Microbe. You go out into the soil profile and bring me plant available nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, everything that I need to be a healthy, productive plant. And I'll keep this photosynthetic thing going on where I'll leak some things out of the roots and keep feeding you, and everybody kind of gets along. So that's that living root, aspect, and that can get, we could talk for hours about that. But then, of course, you got diversity that you need. I mean, the more diverse types of plants you have, and really diversity is not about production. Diversity is about resilience and risk management, if you will. Because if one plant, if conditions aren't right for one plant, maybe another one kind of kicks in. Different types of plant have different types of, the exudates, the things that they're leaking that we talked about before. So you got different plants, some microbes, like different types of, they like us, they probably don't like to eat the same thing every day. And the last one is disturbance, trying to minimize disturbance. And notice it says minimize. It doesn't say eliminate, it doesn't say don't disturb. And that one was the hardest thing for me to understand as a grazer, because with disturbance, you're thinking cropping systems is real easy, right? I mean, you got tillage versus no-till, a massive disturbance, minimal disturbance. So it took me a while to figure out, but I thought, okay, how do we disturb grazing systems? Well, it's the act of grazing, right? And that's kind of one of the biggest ways we disturb it. So a lot of people, I stop them before I say, now, the amazing grazing coordinator is not saying don't graze. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying manage that disturbance, right? And I always like to kind of use an analogy of building a muscle. If you want to build a muscle, how do you make it stronger? Do you not use it at all? No, you work it out, but then you rest and you let it recover, and then you work it out again. Well, same thing with grazing. I think you can roll in there, rotationally graze it, use all types of different grazing methods, and then you can, let it rest, recover, and then do the whole thing over again. I think that's what a lot of farmers and ranchers miss is that grass that you never get a chance to grow because you've got 10 cows there standing waiting to eat it because you're probably a little overstocked, you're not resting your pastures, you're not rotating enough. And I mentioned the other two principles of soil health that some folks like to talk about are adding livestock to the system. Well, in cropping systems, that one makes a lot of sense because you're maybe grazing cover crops, which can kind of work pretty good. But it doesn't make as much sense in a grazing operation until you think about it and you say, okay, let's dig a little deeper here. Literally, do we have the right type of livestock? We're a cow-calf operation when really we'd be a better seasonal stocker operation maybe in our environment. And that could make a lot of sense. Should we add sheep? Should we add goats, to our grazing system? Do we have some invasive plants there that those species would help us with? And of course, the sixth principle of soil health is context. Understand your context from not just an ecological standpoint, but also just from a personal point of view. You ranch in an area, like you mentioned, rainfall can be challenging at times. So that probably means your stocking rate should be a little flexible, or you just need to be prepared to have harvested forages to feed. And then hopefully you'd feed those harvested forages in a way in an area where it might help you grow more grass in the future, So if you're going to feed that hay, get paid to do it, and put it out on the landscape somewhere.
Well, you said adaptive grazing, but that's adaptivity there, and it's
adaptive management.
Core of it. Yeah. What you were saying is if maybe you're not meant, maybe I'm paraphrasing, you're not meant to be a seed stock producer, maybe it'd be better suited being a stalker, backgrounder. And so I think that sometimes I feel like that some people really excel at that in farming and ranching, at adapting. And some people probably need to work on that skill a little bit more.
Or maybe you need to be a sheep producer. And oh boy, most people Most people don't dream about being a shepherd, though. Most people dream about being a cowboy, don't they?
Yeah, you tell someone with a cowboy hat in the Flint Hills, have you thought about getting rid of your cows and just having sheep? you might get
That's the way to get
run off the land
that's
there.
The way to get in a fight.
But you mentioned sheep, and this is something that has happened. I've two people that live. I've seen this with two different friends of mine where they graze. One of them grazes in the Flint Hills, and I'm trying to remember where the other one grazes at. They're further like south central Kansas, and they both have made this decision that they're going to introduce sheep to their cattle operation. And so you are the expert on why they have done that. And so I will let you, way better than me paraphrasing, you just explain like why would someone add sheep to your cattle operation, and maybe why you guys have added sheep and goats to your operation.
Yeah, well, we first added goats. We moved to Roxborough in 2001, and the meat goats showed up in 2002 because there were some old dozer pile windrows from when they cleared land, the land and made pasture out of it. They just piled up the stumps and everything. And of course, they were, at that time, they were probably about 20 years old. So they had big trees, growing up through them, not very desirable trees, mind you, but they were trees.
Wasn't a real big, pretty oak or something like that.
Yeah. It was some undesirable species that covers the ground pretty quick. So those things were probably, hundreds of feet long. I mean, 300 feet long and probably 20, 30 feet wide. You couldn't see through them. I mean, brambles, multiflora rows, lots of brush. You would have different species, but you can kind of imagine probably. So it didn't take us long to figure out that we were paying just as much to rent that and not getting anything out of it as we were the open pasture. So we said, goats, So we got goats, and man, they were just every kind of goat in the world. I gave a guy, I'll never forget, and I always like to say I made more money, gross return on my investment with goats than I have anything else. I gave a guy $1,000, and he bought us 20 does.
Woof.
And a boar appearing buck. Now, this was before goats got expensive, but but I'm telling you, you talking about some rough. There was a giant pygmy in there, some La Mancha, Alpines, and of course the boar, the buck was a boar. I'll call him a boar appearing buck.
I noticed that. I picked up on the boar appearing part there.
Because you don't know what he was. And I would never do anything like that with my cows. I think back on that, I think there's no way I would do that with cows. I would be much too picky and say, no, I want this one, not that one, this, that, and the other. But the goats, I say, yeah, just bring them on.
Bring them all. You had like Noah's Ark of goats there.
Yes. So from those 20 goats, we sold, hundreds of kids. I can't remember exactly when we went out of the goat business. It's somewhere around 2010, but we ended up having about 100 does. And you can almost double in size every year with goats or sheep.
You want goats having twins. They're like, people who raise goats are like, twins, yay.
Yeah, the cattle, it's, oh gosh.
Oh, man.
Sometimes 2 + 2 = 0 most of the time.
That's right,
cattle.
yeah.
So that's one reason to get them, sheep or goats is diversity from a grazing standpoint. Goats, they love browse, brush. So if you've got brush, goats make the most sense. Now, we got goats in 2002, I said, and then sheep in 2005. And we ended up getting too many small ruminants for our management team. And that's, of course, me and my wife.
I knew you were going to say Sharon.
Yes. So we decided something had to go. Well, it was the ones that were harder to fence. And the goats sometimes would just go between pastures because our place was fenced really well for cattle, but not really well for goats or sheep. So we ended up getting rid of the goats, and that's the other thing I'll say about goats. It's not a matter of if they're going to get out or when. It's when they get out. And you have a guy that you've never seen before shows up in your driveway 7 a.m. in the morning and says, "Are you the guy that owns the goats?" nothing good ever comes after that. So we got them back. Nobody got hurt, and it was an entertaining story that I've told many times.
When you say you got them back, how many did you get back? Like, were they all gone?
It was interesting. They had rode a temporary fence down. They rode a sapling down over the temporary fences. Only about 20 of them got out.
Oh, okay.
And they went down a railroad spur and ended up in a guy's yard. And it was only about, a tenth of a mile from the very northern pasture on our farm we live on. So I went and I shook a feed bucket out the window of my truck, and he got behind me with his hazard flashers on, and we came down the driveway, and we didn't meet any traffic at all. I was almost to the gate. Well, here comes the school bus.
Oh, no.
And then boy, the kids, they were just hanging out the window. They just thought that was the greatest thing in the world. Luckily, the goat stayed focused and followed the bucket, and we got them back up. And so, that's the other thing to think about. Goats can be hard to deal with from a fencing standpoint. I found them to be a little not as resilient and as tough from a parasite tolerance standpoint as the sheep have been. We got sheep because they like broadleaf plants, and they'll graze just like cattle. So they are more like cattle than goats would be. And we got them just for diversity of income. Again, diversity, in enterprises is not a maximizing profit strategy. The way you maximize profit, you find your most profitable enterprise, and then you do that at scale. I mean, that's what you would do. But the reason we have different types of critters around is for resiliency, is to kind of help us add a little bit of income here. If cattle prices are down, sheep prices may be up pretty good. And for a cattle guy that's just loves everything about a beef cow, if I had to pick one species to survive on, the sheep would probably have a lot of advantages. I know a lot of people have heartburn over that. And
you're going to get kicked out of your bull sale.
I'm going to get kicked out of the cattle club now. I can feel it. But it still is Rogers Cattle Company, though. I will say that. So
there you go.
We've not changed the name, but sheep can be very sheep or goats, either one can add alternative, sources of income. If you've got young people that are wanting to come back to the farm, the next generation, that you need to add an enterprise, sheep and or goats, depending on what your feed resources are, can be and now if you've got a solar farm, coming, and some people don't like to call them solar farms, solar fields, you can make a pretty good living grazing, being paid to graze, and do some mowing in a lot of cases in those solar farms. So it can, again, it's one of those things that you may not like to deal with, but if it's in your community anyway, and you're looking for an alternative source of income, there you go.
Well, back to this interdependence, and you guys, I'm just going to switch and move off of the goats and sheep here, but you had mentioned interdependence with other people, and you are a seed stock operation. And so for those who maybe don't know much about that, like a cooperator or things like that, like why, what drives that decision? Why should people consider that from a cattle standpoint? This is a beef podcast, so we have to kind of pull back here. I like talking about the goats and sheep. We got to pull back here to the cattle for a second.
We don't want to turn it off just yet, so let's bring it back to cows. Yeah, the cooperator arrangement is something that we were buying some bulls from Red Hill Farms anyway. So that's probably a place to start, is for somebody you already have a relationship with, you like the type of cattle they raise. That starts kind of making sense that you would try to connect if you're going to connect at all. And then I knew that they had approached another mutual friend of ours, Ronnie Holman, about being a cooperator. So I thought, that's something that we might consider doing. So started talking to Bart and Sarah Jones at Red Hill about that. And anyway, that's, gosh, I can't remember how many years, probably been about 10 years now that we've had been sending bulls over there. It was the A calf crop was the first calf crop we sent over there, the crop of bulls. And we send them weaned bull calves is the way our arrangement is. And then we'll split the revenue So, it's interesting. I've got a graph on some slides that I show that looks at, the number of bulls we were selling and the price we received per bull and then the total revenue in bull sales. And, it's bumping along there, just a few here, a few there, and then it just goes up. I mean, you can't quite see it, but it goes up at a very steep angle. And it's, so I always like to say we were kind of messing around, trying to sell a few bulls here. And it's tough as a small seed stock producer, to build a program. And it's almost like a leap of faith. Yeah, you got to have enough volume of animals offered for people to travel some distance to kind of have some interest. And even if they like your cattle, they just can't, justify if you've only got, 5 or 10 bulls. And so being able to go, plus we went back to a couple of states that have a lot of cattle in Tennessee and Kentucky. And of course, that's not too far from Missouri and Kansas. And of all things, we've sold bulls into Montana. And I'm going, wow, who would have ever thought that, that could have happened, and Nebraska, the states that, big cattle states, so it's been very humbling, and we've been blessed to be able to work with that. And of course, I have to give Bart and Sarah and them a lot of credit. They built the framework there, and we're just contributing to that. And you say, well, why not try to build your own brand? Well, you can, but there's inherent risk, and you're going to take the lumps there. And we did some of that. I was thinking about it this morning that we did work with some other producers, kind of a consignment sale. We called it the New Horizons Bull Sale. This would have been back in the early 2000s. And we were custom developing bulls for other people and had a little bull sale. And it was a struggle. We just never could get it off the ground. And the cooperator deal is, at least you're going into something that's kind of established, and it's people you like, people you trust, people you want to work with, that you like the cattle. It's not a very far leap to make that happen. And again, if you look at the revenue we got per bull, it was kind of stayed about the same. But if you multiply that times the number of bulls that we're selling now, we went from struggling to sell half a dozen bulls a year to now we'll probably sell 25 to 30 bulls a year. So we're in the bull business now, thanks to, that cooperative arrangement.
Well, and then you don't have the added, when you're raising bulls, you have to have somewhere to keep them from when they're weaned to when they're ready to market. And I don't remember if you're a fall calver or a spring calver, but yeah, fall calver. So you're keeping them about 18 months for the most at that point, depending on when fall starts. For us, we start calving August, September, but you're keeping them around longer. You got to manage them separately. That takes more infrastructure and things like that. So, I mean, those reasoning all makes sense there, from a business and revenue and logistical standpoint. That all makes perfect sense.
And it doesn't just have to be a straight cooperator deal. It could be a partnership arrangement, where you're collaborating with others on a bull sale or something, just anything to get more volume. That way somebody could drive, a few hours, and instead of seeing your 5 or 10 bulls, he can see, 50 bulls, And of course, Red Hill, they have diversity of breeds. They have Sam Angus and some Charolais and some South Pole hybrids they've been working with, along with Red Angus and some Black Angus, now that I think about it. And we had Red Angus and Sam Angus for a little while, and then we just got tired of, dealing with two breed associations. Not that breed associations are bad to deal with, they're fine, but it's just the amount of paperwork we were having to deal with. So it was just easier we turned those Sam Angus cows into recips and did some embryo transfer, something we wouldn't have done without the ability to market more bulls, and we've always tried to make the farm pay for itself. The amazing grazing money that goes somewhere else. It doesn't go into Rogers Cattle Company. I don't want to support my cattle habit with outside income. Now we did to get started. Obviously, it took a lot of those, Purina dollars and stuff that we had saved up through the early part of our life. So yeah, it's fun. So it's a good deal.
Yeah. Well, you were talking about beef breed associations, and how is your involvement in those, like beef breed associations, has that, and your leadership roles that you've had at those, has that affected, either enhanced or challenged, like the grazing mindset, or like the grazing schools, or things like, has that like helped you through all your career?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, thing you learn, anytime you get involved with a group like a breed association or any type of group of people, you learn about different personality types, and what goes into the way some people think. I mean, we're all shaped by our experiences, right? So everybody has different experiences, and then you put them in a close proximity of each other. And of course, there's this awkwardness, kind of like going to school, I guess, getting to know each other, making friends and all that stuff. But being involved with the breed association, it made me a better cattle breeder, I think, because I understood things at a higher level, and, about, why you do some things the way you do, the value of good contemporary grouping, and why that's important. And and then of course during my tenure on at Red Angus, things like genomics came out, and that was kind of one of those technologies I didn't put a whole lot of stock into. I thought it was all a bunch of marketing, to begin with, and then I learned more about it, and I thought, okay, and it's just an example, one thing that I've seen change, or my thoughts about it have changed, is it was a time saver. The genomics, it gains you time, or you had time that was gained, because you take a bull calf the day he's born, you take a DNA sample, you send it off to the lab, and you have an equivalent of 24 calves. So almost the first calf crop of that young bull, you got it the day, or shortly after the day he was born. And that's, this is real gray hair. I'll say that, on my beard here, it's not dyed or anything.
You didn't dye it.
I did dye it, but so I get to thinking about that. Say, you only have so many calf crops, that we work with anyway, right? So anything I can do to gain time is a good thing, And the other thing I think genomics has done is it's leveled the playing field, because all that Mendelian sampling and things that geneticists talk about, that's a real thing. And so it's kind of like a lottery, hitting the lottery. Well, now, and you couldn't find them, because a lot of the better cattle are the ones that have really good EPDs and things like that. To me, it was kind of lost in it was centered around big contemporary groups. Well, who has big contemporary groups? Large breeders. So small breeders, it was harder for us to break through that glass ceiling. Well, now with genomics, we can find those cattle, and it doesn't matter. You may have one cow, and you breed her, and he just turned out to get all the great genes, and he may be the next great one. But I also, when I say that, I do think in the seed stock industry, Brandy, we spend a lot of time worrying about the next great one. And when what we really should be worried about is trying to make them all better, and probably have more consistency. And I know a lot of times we like to talk about curve benders, or those in the upper end of the bell curve, is what we want to deal with. When in the commercial industry, our customers, they just need to kind of eliminate the bottom, the outlier off the bottom, right? So we probably spend a little too much time focusing on the next, new deal. And so I don't know, but being a part of the breed association did give me kind of a, perspective on cattle breeding. And as far as the way that would relate back to my grazing, I hate to say it, but I think if I had to have good grazing management or great genetics, I think you can have a bigger impact with good grazing management and just average genetics, I really think you can. That doesn't mean I'm not an advocate. I sit on the BIF board. I mean, I'm very involved in improving genetics. Let's do both, right? Improve that. But if you had to pick one, I would rather take the superior grass management. I just think that would help more people, in the short term, and then bring the genetics on later. So, yeah. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I talked a long time. So
no, I always enjoy listening to you talk, Johnny. So that was great. It was a vague question too. It had a lot of nuance, and so you handled it wonderfully.
I gave you a vague answer.
No, it's all right. It was nuanced. I would love to sit and talk with you for another 55 minutes about grass, and we didn't even talk about stockpiling. And we're gonna have to do that. You're gonna have to come back on for like a fall or like a late summer episode so people can talk about stockpiling and things like that, talk about fescue country and all that. Thank you again for joining us. If listeners have questions for you or want to learn more about our discussion or Amazing Grazing or get in contact with you, where can they do that?
Yeah, Amazing Grazing has a web page. So if you just look up Amazing Grazing, North Carolina State University, you can find my email, contact information, or you probably just reach out to Brandy and she'd know how to track me down. So.
Well, I'll put that in the note. We'll put that in the show notes for Amazing Grazing on the North Carolina State, on that website, like the extension website. Thank you again for being here, and to our audience, thank you for tuning in, and we will meet you back here on next week on the Beef Podcast.